All right, so topic for today is the funny name is SharePoint's from Venus, Dynamics is from Mars. I don't know if you've ever heard that a book with a similar type of title before, but the idea is opposites can attract sometimes. So what it really is about is some of the real world SharePoint/Teams integration with Dynamics 365, or really slash model driven power apps in general. So you don't necessarily have to be a Dynamics user to appreciate this. If you're doing anything with Power Apps or model-driven Power Apps in particular, and you want to do better document handling via all the great tools available in SharePoint, this is the session for you. Or if you're just curious about it, we'll be talking about that. So again, you may not know about the book Venus and Mars, but the idea is opposites really can attract, right? We see that in human relationships all the time. You kind of see a couple together and you're like, how did those two find each other? They're so different, but they're so good together, right? And you see it in business too, right? Executives, visionary and abstract, and managers, exacting and concrete, project managers, controlling and super organized, and technologists and designers, more innovative and unstructured. And so, do they sometimes bang heads together? Yeah, of course. But also their opposite natures, the dynamic nature of the things they bring to the table, make them work together better. And so I think the same is kind of true of, I'll say, Dynamics and SharePoint, even though, as I started in the introduction, that covers a variety of different things nowadays. But it's not necessarily a no-brainer either. It's easy to make mistakes, and sometimes opposites don't end so well, as we all know too. So I'm going to try to share some tips and tricks and tales from the trenches and that kind of stuff. So if you're thinking about making these things work together, we'll go from simple to more complex in how you might make these applications talk to each other. I got to chat a little bit as we got started, but again, my name is Geoff Ables. I founded a company called C5 Insight, I guess I'll say here in Charlotte, North Carolina, about 20 years ago, but we're really kind of all over the place. We're totally virtual now. We have no plans to go back to an office. We're kind of partially in one before COVID, thinking about going virtual. When COVID hit, we said, well, let's just make that decision final, and have had no regrets about it since making it. And we focus on this idea of digital customer and employee engagement. So we wind up with clients on more the Microsoft 365, SharePoint, Teams, that kind of thing, and more on the Dynamics 365, and then the hybrids where we cross. So I like talking about how those worlds come together a little bit. And there's all my contact info if you want it. A little bit more about me, I think. So there's the fun part that makes all the geeky work part worthwhile. So we have two grown daughters. In fact, one of them just moved. So that daughter, her husband, and our grandson live in Chattanooga, Tennessee, about 5.5 hours that way. Our older daughter and her husband live in Virginia Beach, Virginia, about 5.5 hours that way. My wife and I love riding a motorcycle together whenever we can, and we love sampling fine spirits, be that bourbon or wine. My wife is actually a certified wine specialist, so I'm kind of the guy who doesn't know what he's talking about, but she teaches me a lot about that and our adventures together. And that's our little buddy, our little COVID buddy, Verdi, down there with the hat. So she usually sits right down there, except when I do video calls, she hates them, then she goes somewhere else in the house. So a little bit about me. Love to learn more about you guys as I get to know you better. Connect with me on social. I'll put all that stuff up there again later at the very end if you want to reach out and connect a little bit. So our agenda is this. We're going to talk a little bit about how documents are managed natively by Dynamics. And remember, whenever I say Dynamics, also think model-driven Power App. We'll talk about the native out-of-the-box integration available between that and SharePoint, as well as the native integration to Teams, which, as you guys know, is in some ways the same thing, because SharePoint is a document handler for Teams anyway, but it has some unique components to it. Then we'll talk about getting a little more customized using Power Automate, and we'll even give some use cases for some different scenarios you might be faced with that you want to think about that with. And then I'll talk a little bit about other integration outside of documents. So most of what I'll talk about today is document management, but there's a lot of other things you can do to make these applications talk to each other. So time permitting, we'll get into that fifth and final topic before we wrap it up. So let's talk out of the box. And by the way, I will say I'm going to turn on chat here, but I am notoriously bad at watching chat and taking questions as they come in. So if you want to put them there, that's fine, and I'll try to review them at the end. Or if you have a burning one, feel free to just interrupt me. If it's contextual and topical and you really like the answer, just unmute your mic and speak up. And this is your session, not mine. We'll make it as much about what you want to cover as I can. So how Dynamics, how model-driven Power Apps handle documents out of the box is it's a good user experience in many ways, right? So in the middle of most forms, so let's say you're looking at a form about a contact, a person, you have this window called the timeline. And in the timeline, you can have any activities. So an activity is something like an email you tracked out of Outlook, or an appointment you had with them, or a task. And most things that can show up in here can be synchronized with Outlook. Some of them are unique just to the Dynamics experience. Within the timeline, I have this little link up here, this little paperclip link I can click. When I click it, it gives me the ability to create a note, and within the context of the note, add an attachment to it, as you can see down here. Can you guys see me moving my mouse? I'm using Teams to present this. Can you see me moving my mouse around the attachment?
I can't see your mouse, but we can see the slide.
Okay, now I'll know not to bother with that then. So down at the bottom there, you see it says Tailspin RFP response. So that's where I can type my note up above, and then I can just basically point to a file on my computer and put it in there. Think of it like uploading a file to a website or something like that, because this is a web app. It's essentially the same thing. And then I click the Add Note button. And you can see there it is. It's added that to the timeline. It's put the subject and the topic in there. It's also given me that file. Now, when you look at that file in there, notice one thing. It's kind of cool because right in the timeline, I see a link to that file. If I click that link to open that file, what it does is it downloads that file back down to my desktop. So you can see down there, just like I clicked a link on a web application somewhere, and it says, great, I'm gonna let you download this and open it and look at it on your desktop. That's what it's doing here. So you folks who are probably more familiar with SharePoint might say, that's probably not an optimal experience, right? Now, if I wanna edit that document, I have to go re-upload it back into Dynamics if I wanna have access to it. Now, also within email, you can see this is an email in regular Outlook. I think this is the Outlook web client. But I can click the track button from the Dynamics integration in Outlook, and it will actually track that email, including the attachments, into Dynamics, which is another kind of cool thing, right? So I don't have to worry about trying to keep my email categorically managed, because this will automatically link it to the contact based on its email address and anything else I want it to be regarding. So if I'm working on an opportunity in my pipeline, I can say regard it to that opportunity, brings the email in, the full body of it, and the attachments with it at the same time. Kind of slick. There are some limitations. So for one thing, you have a maximum file size. You have a little bit of flexibility around this, but not a lot. I think you can take it up to 7,000K instead of just the 5,000 default. Might be 10 now, I'm not sure. But still, you have some limitations. If you're sending really large PDFs or architectural drawings or PowerPoints with lots of images in them or something like that, you're going to run into a few limitations that you're going to need to work around with it. So some pros and cons. First of all, it's very simple to use. It's built right into Dynamics. Usually out of the box, people just start using it. No configuration necessary. The Outlook integration is great. Most CRM systems, if you don't have Outlook integration, people are always copying and pasting email bodies into their CRM solution and re-uploading things that are attached to the email into the CRM solution. So that's nice. There's also search with relevance built into Dynamics. So I can search those attachments within the Dynamics search overall. We talked about some of the cons. File size limitation really isn't that big of a deal. One of the bigger deals we run into a lot is storage costs. Microsoft charges, just like they charge for document storage in SharePoint, this charge for document storage in Dynamics. Only they charge a lot more for document storage in Dynamics. They recently changed that model, so you get away with a little more file storage, a little less database storage. That's a long story, but regardless, if you have a lot of documents you're tracking in emails, or you put in versions of quotes out there or something like that, you will probably run into your storage limitation pretty quickly. And as you go over it, you start getting a lot of recurring storage fees on top of it. The in-place opening and editing experience, non-existent. You have to actually download it, open it, edit it, save it, go back into Dynamics, delete the old one, re-upload it. Not very optimal. So it's mostly kind of a document repository. If you need to go look at something, I wouldn't say it's a place you would ever want to go and reopen and edit documents stored that way. No versioning, no version history. Search, obviously, without relevance is not there. And And of course, there's no visibility outside of Dynamics. You have to have a Dynamics license to go in and see the files stored this way. So again, if you're a smallish company and this is a boon to you to be able to do that, that might be perfect. But if you're bigger and more complex and potentially have lots and lots of files, you might want to consider one of these other options we'll talk about that go from some time, but probably no financial investment, to maybe financial investment, depending on what else you want to do. Are there any questions? Okay. So now let's talk about the out-of-the-box integration that's available with SharePoint. And this has actually been in place for a very long time. I would say probably since CRM version, maybe 2011, 2013 at the latest is when they had added it. So I'm not going to give you all the details on this. I'm just going to kind of point you towards how this works. And if you have more questions afterwards, I'm glad to help you. But basically, when you set it up, you just go into Dynamics. There's a setup area, administration area. You go to the documents area and you choose some settings. One of the settings you see up here under item number 6 is you say, do I want this based on an entity or not? If you base it on an entity, entity was the old name for table. Microsoft calls these tables now. If you base it on a table, it's going to be either account or contact. And what it does is it uses rules to create a hierarchy under that for you. So it says, okay, if everything's based on the entity and the entity is account, well, all of your opportunities are associated with accounts, and all of your cases, your issue tickets are associated with accounts too. So I'll arrange those hierarchically so you can go to the account and you can look at subfolders under that account to find what you're looking for. If you do not choose to do it based on entity, you kind of get what we saw here. You wouldn't check this box. And under the non-entity based header there that you see there, you can see all the document libraries it's created. And these are for all the different tables I selected in my configuration that I want to have documents associated with. So it basically says every single table is now going to have its own unique document library, but in only one SharePoint site to manage all of those attachments. And if I did choose entity-based, you can kind of see a view of what the hierarchy looks like here. Now, first of all, a lot of people go, wow, that's a cool view of the hierarchy in SharePoint. How did you do that? It was through cut and paste magic. This was not an out-of-the-box thing. It was just trying to illustrate the point. But the idea here is if you look at Coho Winery, you can see it says, okay, here's Coho Winery, and you can see that big gobbledygook after it. That's the globally unique ID or GUID for that record, Coho Winery, in Dynamics. And it says, okay, you wanted to also have documents for incidents. So I created a folder under Coho Winery called Incident. And in that folder, I created a subfolder for each incident. And within those folders, you can actually find the files associated with those items. And you can see I did a similar thing with opportunity down there as well. So what's the user experience like with this? Well, within Dynamics, it's a pretty nice user experience. I can go to my basic navigational area. If you look under the kind of that orange bar, you'll see the different tabs that are exposed for each form I'm looking at. And you can see there's a tab there called Files that's currently highlighted. I click that tab and I can see the files in the folder within SharePoint associated with this record. So if you remember on the previous slide, I talked about an opportunity. Well, there's the opportunity at the top, opportunity for SKU 103, blah, blah, blah. So if I go and look within SharePoint, I would see that's where those live. But when I'm in Dynamics, I just go to the Files tab, and it's going to show me those files right there. I don't have to go to SharePoint to see them. I don't navigate anywhere. I interact with them, and I interact with them almost in the same way I interact with them within SharePoint. I have the ability to do look at different versions. I have the ability to click it once and open it in place. I can click new and create a new document and have it go into that location for me automatically. All that's handled pretty nicely, a pretty good end user experience. I can also click open the location in SharePoint to actually go look at it within SharePoint. And you can actually see if you look under the document associated grid header there, it says documents on default site 1. So that was my creative name for where I put all my SharePoint documents when I set up this example. But I could have documents in other places too. So I can say, oh, I want another SharePoint site where I manually create a place where I share documents. Or as a user, I want to add a new document, but it's on my OneDrive. And all that honors security. So if another user is in here and that user doesn't have permission to see that document on my OneDrive, they're not going to see it, but I can see it. So lots of flexibility with what I see when I go look at these files within this tab in Dynamics. Now, the user experience from SharePoint, not so great in my opinion. So you remember, first of all, we had those GUIDs in there, right? So there's opportunity, and remember the opportunity name was SKU 103, blah, blah, blah. Then there's underscore, and all that other stuff is a GUID. That GUID helps it to keep a unique name for each folder so it can find where it needs to put stuff. But that's not a very end user friendly name to look at when you're looking at something inside of SharePoint. So you also saw the overall hierarchy in there. Someone just kind of perusing that SharePoint site or even the subfolders within the site, it's not necessarily easy to navigate that. If you've got a lot of accounts with a lot of subfolders under them and all of those have those ugly GUIDs, that's not such a great experience. So it's there. You can use SharePoint Search to go find what you're looking for in there. My opinion of this is good if you want to store your documents in SharePoint, but your intention is not really to make it easy for people in SharePoint to get to the documents. So the cost savings and user experience with version editing and in-place opening, way, way better here than what I showed you with the default document management, right? I think it's a huge improvement. But if you also think, oh, and cool, they're in SharePoint, so my SharePoint users will just browse to get to them too. Well, maybe not so much because it's a lot of funky stuff that keeps things sorted. So pros for this, it's out of the box, it's inexpensive. It automates your governance, right? Your file organization is pretty automated. It says based on where this record is, I'll place the file appropriately within whatever hierarchy you've agreed to up front. It's a friendly experience in Dynamics itself, great storage costs, gives you great document management capabilities. Dynamic search is not yet wired to this. I don't know if that's on the roadmap or not, but SharePoint search is. So you can just search in SharePoint to find what you're looking for. And of course, those documents are visible to non-SharePoint users. The cons, although the business rules, the governance is automated, which is nice, it's also not very flexible unless you go one-off, configure each location as you create an account, for example, which is a tall order for Dynamics users because they tend to be very customer facing, very people first. Technical learning curves, not going to be their specialty. The SharePoint experience is not great. The complexity of adding new locations, if you want to do things across different locations, not great. And remember that email tracking out of Outlook, well, that does not happen automatically. So even if I set all of this up, I track an email out of Outlook into Dynamics, it is still going to put that document into Dynamics, not into SharePoint. Turning on SharePoint integration does not turn on automatic moving of email attachments to SharePoint. More on that later. Okay, questions about that before we jump into Teams integration a little bit? Cool. Okay, so now let's talk about what's available for Teams. So first of all, to set up Teams integration with Dynamics, it's actually pretty easy peasy. If you go into the administration area, and these screenshots are a little old, this is focused more on the classic interface. The new Power Apps type of interface is gradually adding more and more of these features, and I haven't looked at this particular thing there. But in the old way, essentially what you do is you go to the administration area, you just go and click on System Settings, you get a pop-up dialog, you click on the first tab in that dialog, scroll down to where it says Microsoft Teams Integration, and there's two on-off buttons there. The first one is basically the foundational level integration. You can turn that one on only, and you get about 80% of the benefit you do by checking both. You turn the second one on, you get 100% of the benefit. Why would you not turn the second one on? Because to turn the second one on to provide a better integration experience, it means some data is moving back and forth into essentially the Azure environment. And so depending on your privacy settings and security settings, you may or may not be okay with that happening. Probably all but the biggest companies are going to go, yeah, of course, that makes sense. But some mega companies might say, we can't support that yet. Now, when you want to actually activate that integration, again, pretty easy peasy to do. If you're in Dynamics and you're on any given record, you click the Collaborate button. The Collaborate button at the top of the interface basically has the Teams icon on it, and it says Collaborate. You click that, it gives you a pop-up, and it says, pick a team to integrate this record with, or do you want to create a new team? Do what you need to do. When you're done with that, it says now, pick a channel or create a channel. Do what you need to do. And then it says, oh, and by the way, and this is the more advanced second yes button on the setup integration. By the way, here are people that have access to this record in CRM that may not yet have access to this record in Teams. Do you want to add them as members to the team? So you can actually update your team members right there interactively as well. So that's one way you can do that. When you're done with that, it is now integrated with that channel and that team. We'll look at the user experience in a minute. Or I can also start from Teams. So if I'm on Teams and I want to integrate with Dynamics, I can just go to the channel I want to integrate with. I can click the plus button to add a new tab. And when I add the tab, I choose the Dynamics app. Then I select, well, which Dynamics org do I want? So, you have multiple different orgs for all of your Power Apps, your Dataverses. You're going to choose the right one there. And then you're going to say, which app do I want to expose also? Because that actually brings in part of the Dynamics user interface. And then I select the entity or record I want it to integrate with. And again, more on exactly what that means in a few slides. So once I'm integrated, here's the user experience from Dynamics 365. And it's really pretty much the same as the user experience for the SharePoint integration. I go to my Files tab, just like I did before. So I'm on the Blue Yonder Airlines account record here. I go over to the Files tab. And under the Files tab, I see here's all of the documents I have access to in Teams. And you can see under Document Associated Grid, it says what you're looking at is the team D365 accounts, the channel Blue Yonder Airlines or whatever it is that we've stored those under. But the rest of that experience is just like the SharePoint integration experience. So I can click that record and open it live. I can open Teams to see it within Teams, whatever I need to do. But I get that full, rich, much better viewing, editing, updating, saving, version history that's provided essentially by SharePoint that is much superior to the native Dynamics 365 document management. And then if I need to actually open the team channel to collaborate right from within that same Dynamics record, I can just click. I don't have to go to Files first. I can click the menu Collaborate button, just like I clicked to create a collaboration. I can click that button again. It'll say, oh, you've already got an existing team integrated with this. Do you want to create a new place to collaborate? Or do you just want to open this team? Click the team, click Start Collaboration, the blue button at the bottom. Bang, it opens up Teams with the Dynamics integration right there. Any documents I put in the Files area of that channel for that team, those documents are going to show up here. It's automatically kind of wired that up for me. The experience from Teams, so a little different and probably much better than the experience from SharePoint with the native SharePoint integration. So depending on exactly how I set this up, first of all, documents that I add in Dynamics 365 also are now visible in Teams. So I can add documents from Teams and they show up in Dynamics. I can add documents in Dynamics. They're going to show up in that team for me. Also within Teams, the added tab is going to make that Dynamics record visible to you directly within Teams. So if you look at the bottom screenshot down there where it says Blue Yonder Airlines, second tab over, Blue Yonder Airlines, whatever has in parentheses there, I'm actually looking at the Dynamics record right there, and I can fully interact with the Dynamics record right within that tab. I don't have to open Dynamics. If I want to, I can click the little web globe up there in the upper right corner. That'll pop up the Dynamics record for me immediately right inside the web application. But there's really not much need to do that because I can do all the edits that I want to here. Now, this does still honor your licensing. So if I don't have a Dynamics license and I click that tab, I'm not going to be able to edit that record or even have visibility to that record. But I can still go look at the Files tab and see the files associated with that record, and I can update those files, add new files, whatever I want to do. I could also purchase lower end licenses for some of my users. If I say, well, they don't need the full experience, but I do need them to at least be able to see most of these records, well, you might get a Power Apps license or something like that to give them some of the visibility that they need. So some pros and cons of this one. Again, it's another out of the box, nothing special about this that we set up at all. Pretty easy to set up. You saw just a couple of clicks for the administrator and it's available to users. It now gives you more user-driven file organization, right? It's no longer as soon as I create an account, it's going to go create a folder or a team or something like that somewhere, and I'm stuck with what it did. No, it doesn't create anything until I say, integrate this account with Teams. And then it says, okay, where do you want me to put it? So you have the users in the driver's seat for that. Very friendly Dynamics experience. You still get full advantage of the better storage costs. You get the great doc management capabilities. You get the great SharePoint and team search capabilities. It's visible to teams and SharePoint users, and in a much friendlier way, in my opinion, than the native out-of-the-box SharePoint integration. No ugly GUIDs in there, right? It's basically doing a mashup to keep everything available. Some of the cons. With flexibility comes some other problems, right? Great, users can set up their organizational structure. When users do that, they usually make some messes, and now you're going to open yourself up to some of that. The other thing is there might be possible complexity issues. You may remember I said, if I click collaborate when I'm already set up with a team, it says, do you want to collaborate with another team, or do you want to go to the one you're already configured with? I can collaborate. I can set up integration with as many channels as I want in here, as well as OneDrive. So if I add a file into Dynamics view of something, I have to be very careful if it's set up to work with 3 different channels on 3 different teams. Well, how do I know which channel that's being added to? I need to make sure I'm in the right place in Dynamics to make that happen. Otherwise, things start not showing up where I expect them to. Also, you're set up with all the other teams governance issues you might have. A CRM user puts a document out there and says, this is great, I'll come back here to find it. A team's owner deletes that team along with all the documents, and all of a sudden I've lost this vital document that's really important to me. Renaming has some issues in here as well, although that's made some progress, but renaming things in Dynamics, for example, doesn't always correctly get reflected in Teams, just like sometimes renaming things in Teams doesn't always, I know it's improving, but doesn't always get reflected in SharePoint the way we'd want it to. And again, this still does not address the Outlook integration. I track an email from Outlook into Dynamics with attachments. Those attachments are stored only in Dynamics, not in SharePoint. Okay, so what do we do about that? If we want to take it to the next level beyond what's available out of the box, and what's available out of the box is pretty powerful. One of the things I would say is whether you use it or not, you just have to have good governance to make this stuff work well. If you just turn users loose with it, you're going to wind up having messes, right? I always tell people, they think, well, we want to go to SharePoint because, we made a mess of this file share and we know SharePoint's better. I'm like, SharePoint, you can actually make a much bigger mess much more efficiently than you ever could with a file share, unless you use some of the controls built into SharePoint to help you keep the right structure around it. And the same is true with this integration we're talking about now. And Power Automate can start to give you more governance controls as you do it, as well as more flexibility with how it works. So some quick talking points on that. First of all, let me give you a use case. And this is actually, I don't usually talk about how we do things for C5 Insight. I talk about how we've done things for clients, but this is something we have done at C5 Insight that's very relevant to this. So we have a legacy SharePoint to Dynamics integration that we put together many, many years ago when we were still on-prem with SharePoint. We updated a little bit when we migrated to cloud, but still it is outdated. But let me explain to you a little bit about how it works. So we talked about accounts. You have accounts in Dynamics. An account is essentially a company. Sorry for the fast build here. We won't have time to go through every one of these in detail, but I'll give you the high level as it builds. So an account is a company. So all of our clients are accounts in our Dynamics implementation, as well as a lot of prospects and that kind of thing. Opportunities are something in the pipeline, right? An opportunity is something you hope will convert into revenue for the organization, right? It's an opportunity to maybe do business with someone. Someone calls and says, will you send me an RFP? Will you do a demo for me because we think we might want something from you? Okay, those are opportunities. We hope if we impress them correctly and we compete well, that we're going to actually bring them in and have a project for them. Within our opportunities, if we win an opportunity, it becomes a project. You kind of know what a project is. We actually created our own custom table in Dynamics many years ago for project management. Something else that's a little legacy for us now that we need to upgrade. And then when we work on those projects, we track our time. So we actually created a time tracking table in Dynamics as well. So all 4 of those things have to do with how we want to integrate SharePoint. Top to bottom, what we decided to do years ago was whenever we get a new account, we will create a SharePoint site for that account. In that SharePoint site, right at the parent site level, we will create a separate document library just for opportunities. So regular site, you've got your general documents for the account overall. You've got a separate folder or a separate really document library just for opportunities. And when we do stuff with opportunities in Dynamics, those go in there. Then when that opportunity converts into a project, we actually create a subsite for projects. Remember legacy, please don't create subsites anymore, but that's the way you did it back when we created this. So we set that up. And then we actually create burn down charts. So as our employees enter their time into Dynamics, we actually use that to create Excel reports and essentially integrate those with SharePoint. So when our client logs into their account site, they can see, here's how many hours were assigned to this project or to this milestone. Here's how many hours we've actually burned down on a weekly basis. They can go in there and check that stuff out. So that's how we set up that integration to work. So we create an account in Dynamics, it creates a site. It automatically creates the opportunity document library as well. We create a project in Dynamics that creates a subsite under that parent account. That project site gets its own sets of document libraries to handle certain things. We track time in Dynamics. Those time entries essentially live in Dynamics, but we have a special integration process that pulls those time reports out, puts them back into SharePoint in a graphical format so that our clients can see exactly where they stand. So that's the legacy. Lots of coding was done to make all of that happen. Now, the reality is we could replicate almost all of that with relatively little coding using the out-of-the-box tools now. But we're going to go a little bit further than that. But here's the quick vision of where we want to go with this. So we are envisioning moving to a team for each one of our clients, and there'll be channels or folders for opportunities and cases. So there'll be one channel for opportunities, right? There won't be a channel for each opportunity. There'll just be one channel for opportunities overall. And we'll probably just create subfolders in there for each unique opportunity underneath that. And each project will get its own channel too, because we want to take advantage of the chat capabilities and the history, the meeting recordings and stuff like that. The SharePoint will still get a team site. Whoops, I thought that was a build. SharePoint will still get a team site associated with that, so that the home page can be shared by the client and us. So a lot of times when you create a team, and our experience for what we're doing for ourselves, a lot of clients, you don't go to the home page of SharePoint all the time. Sometimes it makes sense, sometimes it doesn't. We've decided this is probably one case where it would make sense. So the client can now say, here's your login. We may not interact with them on Teams. That's still evolving. We're still having some discussion about that, but we would interact with them for sure on SharePoint. So they can still come to this site and they can see, here's your burn down, here's some other vital stats, that kind of stuff. I put a little mock up here of what we think it might look like when we do it. We'd have security protecting some of our internal files, but the client would have the ability to see and upload some of their own files. Documents that are files from Teams on our Teams channels, those would be internal only. Client documents is how we would actually share documents with the clients. We'd actually create a client documents document library for them so that we know what's in there, they can see, and we can see. So ask me in a year, this might evolve quite a bit. We're still in the design and requirements definition stage of this a little bit. But I say all that to say, how will you now do that, right? None of the out-of-the-box options I offered will really allow you to fully do that. But the cool thing is Power Automate largely will. So I pulled this screenshot, the set of screenshots a while back, but you can see here's all the actions available for Microsoft Teams directly from Dynamics. So you can easily have a flow triggered by Dynamics that says, when a new account is created in Dynamics, create a new team in Microsoft Teams or channel in Microsoft Teams. There's also all these SharePoint triggers we can use as well. So there's a tremendous amount we can do from there. Now, there is also one thing, and it was, I think we've now gotten past this, but when I first put this together, we said, wow, we can't actually create a team yet. There's not an action to create a team. But there was in GitHub something by Christian Glessner where you could actually go to GitHub, add this, and call this from Flow to create a team. My point there being, you will run into, when you start trying to do some of this stuff and then delivering exactly what you envision, something you can't quite do directly within Flow yet. But there's almost always someone who's already thought about that, and there's something out there. So while you're waiting for Microsoft to deliver on it, if you don't have coders, you can usually find some way to make that happen. That's just one example that Microsoft has caught up with now. Now, here's another use case that we've actually are working on finalizing for a client right now. Remember, multiple times I've said out of the box still does not integrate Outlook with SharePoint. So when I track that email out of Outlook into Dynamics, it's taking all the attachments, it's sticking them right into the Dynamics. Well, using a Power Automate plus a little bit of Logic apps and some calls to Microsoft Graph, we're able to now do that. There are some gotchas with it. There are some hard lessons learned going down this what seems like a seemingly simple process, but some things you have to work through to make it happen. But the cool thing is, not long ago, this would have been a very code-intensive operation, probably costing many hundreds of hours. It still cost us quite a few hours, but not nearly as many as it would have if we had to write the code to do all of this. So we're using the power tools mostly to do this. A few of the high-level gotchas we've run into that I'll share with you. One is Dynamics actually stores email attachments in a different table than attachments to notes. Remember when I showed you the out-of-the-box Dynamics, how it handles documents, and I create a note and I click the attachment paperclip? When I store a document that way, it's a whole different table than when I track an email. So you need to kind of know where to go to find those. Conversions are tricky. You can't just say, go get the document and now resave the document. I've got to do like a base 64 to binary type of conversion. And remember, if you're going to do this to say, let's save some space, you're probably also going to go, oh, and by the way, let's migrate all of those old historical attachments into SharePoint as well. Well, it's kind of as simple as looping through that and just kind of recursing through all your past stuff, except if you've got a lot of them, as we found with the first client we did this for, you're going to break the number of API calls you can do in a day as you do it. So you actually have to parse it out over multiple different days or multiple different Power Automate accounts to get things to move along as quickly as you want. But still cool, something within the realm of possibility now. Wow, I'm not sure what happened to the name of that slide. Looks like my text just got botched. Hopefully the next ones look better. This is Beyond Document Management. Somehow that's what that says, or Beyond Documents. Okay. So one of the things when you do the integration with Teams is you can integrate entire views of Dynamics into Teams as well. So again, I'm not thinking about documents right now, but in this case, I'm on a team called CRM Sales, and I'm on the general channel, and I said, hey, you know what? On this CRM Sales team, on the general channel, I want that to list all the opportunities that we're pursuing right now. So there it is. You can see the tab there called Open Opportunities. And below that is a view directly within Dynamics 365. Here's all the open opportunities that we have right now. So if I say, hey, as a sales manager, I want to run a weekly meeting by looking at all the list of open opportunities, I can come here to run that meeting. And I can still do conversations, posts, record meetings, and all that stuff right alongside this while I'm looking at that. And you'll notice below that, I've got some other stuff that we'll talk about in a second. And I don't know why my text is getting botched here. I don't know if that's the same thing you guys see, but I give you the high level. So I gave you one use case already. Another use case is account-based marketing. Some people call it ABM. So where an organization says, look, instead of targeting, whoever comes in over the transom, there are 10 or 50 or 100 really large accounts that we'd really like to do business with. So we're going to target them and we're going to talk about them every week and what we're doing to get better exposure into those accounts to try to win business with them. That's a perfect thing to manage with Teams, but of course you still want to track those accounts in Dynamics. This is a great use case for something like that. Another use case, remember I'm on the same team. Now I've moved down to another channel called Alpine Ski House. And you kind of saw this earlier when I talked about how the documents will integrate here. So in the Files tab, the files on this team will show up under the Alpine Ski House account in Dynamics. But you can also see there's a tab here, Alpine Ski House. And this actually shows me the Alpine Ski House record in Dynamics. So I have the information I need from Dynamics right at my fingertips within Teams. And then there's model-driven record integration with Teams as well. And the idea here is we can use individual channels for individual things going on. So a couple of use cases for this would be if I am in customer service, I could create a channel for each case. That's what a trouble ticket is called in Dynamics. that we might be managing. And now I can collaborate outside the Dynamics 365 user base on resolving that particular case, right? So I might have engineers who don't have access to Dynamics, but I want access to them to get their input into solving a case. Well, here's a place where I can kind of serve up that case to them and create a place where we can store and share files, we can have conversations to help resolve cases. Or marketing is another great example. When you hear marketing campaign, think project, because really what a marketing campaign is a marketing project. And Teams is a great place to manage projects. But Dynamics is a great place to manage some of the structure behind those projects, the number of people you expect to attend, the list of people you're going to send an email blast to, whatever it is. That's another great place to have this kind of integration between Teams and Dynamics. Okay, how are we doing on time? We're getting a little close, so let's move on. This is actually super exciting. Full disclosure, I have not been able to experiment with this yet. I saw it at, I think Ignite might be where I first saw it, but it's publicly, I think it's generally released now, so I think you should be able to go and find it. But one of the things that was always my pet peeve with Teams and Dynamics integration was I can go to Teams and I can kind of see what I need to see that lives in Dynamics. But when I'm in Dynamics, I want to see what's meaningful about this record in Teams without having to flip back over to Teams and look at it. Even with a couple of mouse clicks, I don't want to do that. I want to see it right in here. Well, now you can start to do that. So there's a side panel you can set up with integration to say, when I'm on a record in Dynamics, I can actually see the chats and the channels and the teams that are associated with this record right there inside Dynamics in a panel next to it. I can click those, I can open them, I can add records. There's also a Teams dialer in the side panel. So I can dial something directly while I'm looking at it in Dynamics. I can copy and paste a phone number and put it into the dialer if I want to. Click to call. There's already been a form of it in there already. It's basically like the old Skype click to call integration. So I use this all the time. I click a record, a phone number in Dynamics. It pops up Teams. I make the call within Teams. But now click to call is going to be fully integrated into Dynamics. So I click a number. I still have Dynamics open. I have the Teams pane dialer next to me. I have the call activity show up automatically. And when I make that call, it also now supports transcription. It starts to use AI to capture action items. After the call, it'll report on the entire call. And here's the things I think you need to follow up on based on the transcription report I created for you. Here's your conversational KPIs. Were you talking too fast? Were you using negative words? How do what you do compared to what the best salesperson in the organization does, so I can learn from them and get smarter. If you're interested in that, there's that link down there, gotluck.link /D365 to Teams. That will give you a blog that gives you all that information, a lot more about some very cool Teams to Dynamics integration that has just been released and some other stuff that's coming out. A couple of other use cases here. For Teams, you can also do integration directly into Dynamics on your own via Canvas types of Power Apps or any kinds of Power Apps. And I haven't even done this with Dataverse for Teams, but I assume it's true there as well. So I can use Dynamics 365 data or a SharePoint list in Teams, or a combination of the two of those to do something. In this case, this is a screenshot for a client who said, look, we have some rules that we can use to generate proposals from templates, but they're fairly complex rules. Mail merge out of Dynamics, that's not going to cut it, right? A basic SharePoint list, that's not going to cut it. But if we can capture these 3 or 4 pieces of information about what record it is in Dynamics, what kind of proposal it is that the user enters, and we click save, we can generate that template for the end user and save hours and hours and hours of time a week. Great way to integrate all this with Teams, and then use Teams, if you look at one tab over, to say, we now have an approval process internally and externally on this, and we manage and track that approval process directly within Teams as well via the Approvals tab. Another use case, know your SQAG, so much bigger topic, but think of SQAG as a KPI, key performance indicator. We call them SQAGs if they're defined right, because it's a small, quickly attainable goal. So for one client in the wine industry, they said, this was pre-COVID, they said, hey, we know that the more people we visit in person any given day, the more sales we get. Maybe not that day, but it's just the art of the relationship. Just showing up and connecting, we're top of mind when it's time for them to order something. So they said, that's our squag. Well, that squag was measured in dynamics. In that timeline, whenever they visited with someone, they record a task in there. I visited with Geoff at C5 Insight today, save and close. That information gets sourced into Power BI along with whatever they set as goals. That Power BI information gets put back into teams because they have a geographically distributed sales team and they want them to motivate and inform each other. So now their squag is available here and they can discuss it in the conversations or posts area, and they can encourage one another on. And you can actually see the red bar was their current performance, the green bar was their performance goal, and the purple dotted line was their actual performance. So they blew away their old performance, almost never went back to it except in a down season when they lost a few key people, and pretty much stayed ahead of the green bar from then on. So they permanently changed behavior by setting that goal and making it easily visible to everybody in the organization. So I've been talking a lot. I'll stop. We've got a few minutes for questions. That's always good. A couple of takeaways for you guys. There's my contact information. Some other things, if you're interested in that email to SharePoint solution for Dynamics, let me know. That is not a freebie that we can offer as a free download, but it's something we can talk to you about if you're interested in getting that implemented in your organization. I do have a couple of other things for you, though, that are free. An ebook on Teams governance and another ebook on CPR for CRM. We find a lot of CRM projects really struggle to get adoption and success. If that's something you guys are feeling in your organization, just ping me via email. I'll send you both of those things for free. Please remind me what it is that you want, because I do a lot of these and sometimes I forget what it is someone asked for. And of course, this is what we do. So my hope is always that you get a ton of benefit out of this, but that one or two people would go, I'd like to talk to them about a working relationship too. So if that's describes you and something you'd like to chat about, love to hear from you, of course, about that as well.